the Soul of the Everyman on the ArtistFirst Radio Network. All past broadcasts are podcasts. Pick them up at ArtistFirst.com. We welcome your questions and comments. Please use DJ at ArtistFirst.com. And now here they are, Michael and Margaret Lyons.
Thank you very much, Z-Man. And I am Michael Lyons.
He is. And I'm Margaret.
I've been identified.
Yes, you have.
And for that I am grateful.
Yes, we are all grateful.
We're all grateful, and that's the theme of our show tonight. Tonight we are going to be talking about gratitude, and I looked it up, Margaret.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time we talked about gratitude was in 2019.
Wow.
So
it's about time.
We're overdue.
Mm-hmm.
And so we will be talking tonight about gratitude. And we have a lovely quote from our favorite Eckhart Tolle, who really, he nails it. So if you have it in front of you, do you want to do it?
Sure.
Let's go with that.
All righty. When you go deeply into the present, gratitude arises spontaneously, even if it's just gratitude for breathing, gratitude for the aliveness that you feel in your body. Gratitude is there when you acknowledge the aliveness of the present moment. Tolle.
And Margaret often will reply to people. People come up to you and say, "So how are you? What's going on? How you doing?" And Margaret will say, "I'm breathing." And it will usually give people just a slight little, well, yeah, we're all breathing. What do you mean by that? Unless they know you, in which case they know that this is your typical response. But the nub of that is really a perfect response to how are you doing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And the unspoken in that reply is, I'm grateful for that. You know?
Usually, if someone who doesn't know me, they get a very quizzical look on their face, and they say, "Isn't it more than that?" And I look at them and go, "Have you ever had moments where you couldn't breathe?" They stop for a second. They go, "Yeah, that's true."
Yeah,
like,
you're so set upon.
Mm-hmm. I'll just smile at them and say, "Listen, have you ever consciously tried to breathe on your own? Time yourself and see how long that takes before you forget that you're supposed to do it consciously."
Right.
And not 1 minute goes by.
Imagine if you had to, or you would die. Yes. I guess then you would do it.
Well, it's just what is it? The Darwin Award. The ones that couldn't keep that up they'd be gone.
You know, in a show about gratitude, bringing up the Darwin Award is just a wonderful idea. Everyone out there must know what the Darwin Award is. It's actually given out on a fairly regular basis. And, of course, Charles Darwin was famous for his Origin of Species, and the backstory of the Darwin Award is that, in essence, people who win it are those who lost the survival race, if you will. You get a Darwin Award, sort of a booby prize. But being grateful for existence,
mm-hmm.
and really what Tolle is saying here is being grateful, in essence. You know, it's a chicken and the egg kind of problem, in the sense that which came first, being present in the moment of now, or being grateful. And I say you can get there from either direction. And you just mentioned something interesting as well. You know, you can get to the moment of now by, in essence, thinking about breathing, or literally consciously, and this is the key word here, is consciously breathing. Or Tolle also says one of the things that he does, one of the very first exercises he does with a group of people, perhaps that haven't been in one of his lectures before, or even if they have, he says, now, what I want you to do, we're not going to meditate, but what I want you to do is just become aware of everything that's around you. I want you to consciously look and be aware of and feel the life or the presence of everything around you. And when you do that, when you consciously look and don't just take for granted that the curtains are gray or the wall is green or whatever the heck it is, and you literally look at it and say, there it is, the enormity, the entirety of the universe is arrayed around you, but just take the room that you're in or the person that you're with and literally look at them, which can be distressing, but literally look at them, appreciate everything that's around you, and the first thing that goes is the ego voice. The very first thing that gets silenced is the ego just can't deal with all that, just noticing things. And if you do that, you notice that you become aware of an amazing stillness. And that sort of is the doorway, the entranceway to this moment of now, this sort of endless present. The endless present becomes within your consciousness, and your breathing becomes sort of the metronome of the moment of now, the in-breath, the out-breath. And from that arises this just sort of wonderful feeling of, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm not judging, I'm not saying this and that, look at that one, look at how fat they are, and look at this one, how dumb they are, finding the other in every situation and being right and them being wrong. All those ego things, they all kind of slide into the corners of your consciousness. They're still there, but they're not bothering you. And a boundless kind of gratitude, and I would say, Margaret, a joy kind of wells up from really nowhere or everywhere. And you're kind of like, this is just awesome, just being me. That's the doorway to the moment of now. You kind of say, wow, everything's great. Everything is where it is supposed to be.
I believe that, well, at least speaking with other people as well as observing, the moment that internal voice turns off, people get a very surprised look on their face.
It's so true. Like, wow, I didn't die.
It's just...
Wait a minute. You mean I can live without thinking?
Without that noise going on?
Remember that guy who did that whole monologue about men versus women, and he said, men have the nothing box.
Right.
Men can go in the nothing box and think about absolutely nothing for days on end. What do you think about? Nothing.
Nothing.
And they don't die. It's amazing.
Well, the corollary to that was when women are completely astonished.
Right. At the nothing box.
That
I don't think that's absolutely true, but you know what I mean.
Well, that's the fact that you can think about absolutely nothing and still breathe.
And still breathe. And still your heart continues to beat.
But
I'm grateful for that.
Well, that's why. That's why gratitude rises, because...
Dude, I was thinking about nothing for like an hour, and I didn't die.
And unfortunately, in the culture that we're in, the emphasis is to constantly grab onto the next thought or the next adventure or the next, what is this that you have to attend to?
Yeah.
And if you stopped all that, first of all, your ego is going to say, well, you're going to lose out when you do that. Things don't go the way you want them to when you don't do that. It's all control. Yeah. If you noticed, that internal voice is always using this fear that something's going to go wrong.
Right. Someone will take advantage of you if you're not like right on it all the time.
And being able to disengage from that, literally, it's like you've taken that voice put it on the shelf. You know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And
you can find it.
And it's not too far away. But to have that cease, the cessation, and then the stillness. And it's sort of like the best analogy I can think of is when you see those prairie dog towns where the little prairie dogs are up and alert and they're just looking around, just looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's sort of just it's not thinking about any, just scanning everything, taking it in.
Right.
That's it. And that cessation where it's like, okay, there's nothing at me. There's nothing nagging me.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing demanding my attention for something. It's rather interesting because a phrase had come up today where your silence kills it. And I thought about that. Like your silence stills your enemies. And that basically allows you to see that it was always in your hands. That power was always in your hands.
And it also allows you to see that your enemies attack you through your ego.
Well, they can't get any purchase when you do not respond. In other words, there's no game here. It would be like someone serving a tennis ball and the other person just not hitting it back.
Yeah.
Nothing happens.
There's no. Well, not only is there no game, but again, oftentimes when you're attacked, you're being attacked because their ego, the other's ego, needs something. They need the energy hit.
Yep.
And the energy hit can be negative or positive. If people are coming after you to engage you negatively, they're still taking something from you. If you fight back, if you take them seriously, if you react, no, you're wrong, yes, you're right, da da da. You're that whole interactive phase of ego to ego, unconsciously, unfortunately. Let me back up. When you're attacked, you feel drained. When someone comes into the room and their energy is negative and it comes and focuses upon you, the process of engaging with them drains something from you. The attack and the defense are not zero-sum games. The ego, the other ego, is a parasitic thing. Yours is too. But when you are consciously unconsciously involving yourself, your life force is drained from you. That whole process where egos steal energy from each other is it's this kind of this subtext, this sort of miasma of how these egos parasitically kind of interact with each other. And what Margaret just said is exactly how you get out of that game. And we've gone a little way from gratitude, but this, you can be grateful for this as well, is if you can find that silence, that stillness, is that so? The response of the little monk to being attacked was not to engage, just say, well, in the present moment of now, yes, there's some child that needs to be taken care of, okay. But his response back to the ego attack was to give it no energy, give it nothing, give it just a, is that so? Which is basically facing the ego back with a mirror. Is this the truth? Is this really so? Is this, you give the ego nothing when you reflect it back to itself, and very, very quickly it loses interest. It's not getting fed. It's not able to latch on.
That's the important observation. that the interaction that you happen to be having with this other person, whether you know them or do not know them, is it on an ego level, or is it on a relationship that is far deeper than that? Because if it's ego, then you can observe where this relationship energy resides. Is it strictly a third chakra thing where you're both at each other, conflict? One is over and the other is under. And you're fighting always to be on top.
Yeah, power.
Is it pure survival, where it's just you're part of a group and you're working together to get something going?
Base.
Or is it a creative venture where it's a give and a take, but just strictly, it's a physical thing, not necessarily very deep. But if you get into a heart chakra energy where it's a balanced point and you're grounded and you receive the grace that comes through the higher and you're balancing it in the heart, that's when relationship truly expresses height, depth, and breadth. And good or bad doesn't matter in terms of how it all unfolds, because the outside form, the environment, will always impact in some way. But going back to that.
Well, I would say gratitude, if you ask me, a basic heart level chakra would be a gratitude. A welcoming, in essence, being present in that moment of now, the relationship. Let's say we're talking about a relationship, being present in a relationship. You're grateful for the other. You find joy in them. You can be yourself. This isn't even you're still in the ego world when you're being yourself, because you're still talking about yourself in the third and fourth person. I'm being myself. Look at me. But, how many people are in the room? Just me. But I'm being myself, but you're able to be yourself or more present with that other. That in itself wells up in the relationship as a gratitude for the other, as a joy in the other. And that relationship is at that heart level. So I would say that in the root of the heart, you would find gratitude and joy, and you can pass through those into the present moment of now, or if you get very close to sort of a pure joy, a pure gratitude for the other in the moment of now, you pass into consciousness. You get out of the ego, but that doorway is there. It's right there in the heart, and in gratitude.
Energetically speaking, the way the flow unfolds is that a person is receptive. You'd say the other is receptive. He or she is in that moment of almost searching for something. They're not exactly sure what it is they need, but they're approaching you. And if they're receptive to a higher energy, because they've already come to the point of realizing that they can't answer their question. That's a big one.
Well, yes, you should elaborate on that, but go ahead. The question that they have is, in essence, it becomes a non-ego question. It isn't there's no yes or no answer. It's of the akin of the energy of what is the meaning of my life. That's not a question. But if you're looking at the other and you find a resonance, a completeness of form of the two into one,
okay.
This is sort of that question answering. as well.
Right. Well, it is still a question, but what they're seeing is that they're lacking something.
Yes.
They come into a state where they realize that there's a void in them.
Mm-hmm.
That's big, to admit to yourself that I don't have this. And when you embrace that and take that as a truth, instead of the ego coming in and trying to fill that void with, well, you do this, or you make this much money, or you da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Right, this is who you are, this is who you are.
Yeah. They've come past all that, realizing it's all vapor. And they come into recognizing that there may be an answer right there in front of me. So they basically come to you asking. It's just a questioning mode. They're open and they're ready to receive an answer. And the answer comes in through the higher chakras. It's your connection to God, heaven, spirit. And that openness, in that openness, the grace was poured in and it expresses itself through the heart, the heart chakra, the balance, the unconditional love. You're not expecting any kind of anything from this. It's just the answer to the question.
That's what you said. You're not expecting any kind of anything because it isn't a this gets that. The phrase quid pro quo, but the this gets that. You're not in real relationship. You're not trading. Here's 3 donuts. You give me 1. Whatever. It isn't this kind of a transactional relationship where you're keeping score.
The keeping score is the second chakra.
Right, and it's
the third chakra.
Right. Who's on top? Who's winning?
Who's winning?
Who's winning?
That's a transactional relationship. It's
exactly.
Third chakra. That's all power stuff.
Yes.
Heart chakra is looking at this and it sees if someone's heart is hurting. And it understands that pain, that lack. There's an emptiness, and it's vast emptiness.
And you see yourself in the other, and the other sees himself in you, and there's a reflectiveness and a resonance.
Well, the resonance comes because the identification, the understanding, when you meet a person at their frequency of pain, it's unmistakable. And they look and say, oh, you understand this pain. And grace starts flowing through. When that happens, and they receive whatever wisdom and grace and love that's coming through to them from the heavens, from heaven above, their immediate response is gratitude. It is an exchange of energy. And they received fully, and now they want to give fully. That is the gratitude that we're speaking of. Wholehearted, unconditional. And it's all a response to unconditional love. And to touch into that, you have to be able to release any concept that you may have. Ego has nothing to do with it, because if the ego was there, it would sit there and say, well, start judging the other person that you're speaking with, like this person is this or that, or not worthy, or blah, 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 blah.
Well, I've given them all this, and they haven't given me anything of that.
Right. So that has to be put to the side. And the ego actually will sit quietly and observe the whole thing, because it actually is like, wow, that's so cool.
You can, exactly, but I want to go back to what you just said. As far as when you're in that moment, you've broken through the obvious physical boundaries. You've reached a point where the other, and in this relationship, the other is open and receptive, as is both parties. You have two in a relationship, so both parties are open, receptive. There's a resonance where grace can flow into this relationship space. It amplifies, because resonance always involves a degree of amplification, because you're trading back and forth, and you synchronize. So you amplify, you synchronize, and then what arises within the bounds of the relationship, within these two people and the relationship itself, is gratitude and joy. And there's an immediate you want to give into this relationship. The relationship itself becomes so present to the two individuals, because there are two individuals here, and then there is the relationship. The relationship becomes so present that it becomes almost, I want to say second nature, but it becomes almost impossible to not give into the relationship fully and totally and completely. In fact, you don't feel beholden to give. You become so filled with the energy of the relationship that you desire, you feel so good in giving into the relationship. And it's not transactional. You're not giving in to get back. You're saying, well, I'm going to give all that I have and get all something back, and it's going to be this great trading. No. You give into this relationship. I'll say it, if you bring it into particulars, you would give your life and everything that you have for your child. Why? Because in the relationship, and this is just an echo of this type of relationship, you've already pledged all that you are, in essence, as just a respect. You're all in, you're 100% into this relationship, and you're no longer counting. It's completely beyond, well, I've given 17.5 days into this, and I expect 16.7 out, and then, with some interest and compounding, and I'll be good. No. You give 100% of you, and the other gives 100% of them, and the relationship is infinite. It isn't 200%, if you know what I mean. It's no longer additive. It's not even multiplicative. You've come into a true relationship in the moment of now, and it becomes infinite. We often said this before. Relationships aren't about a half plus a half equals a whole. Relationships are about 1 plus 1 equals infinity. That infinity is also the depth of gratitude and joy, which is the vertical dimension. Gratitude and joy is the vertical dimension, rising you up into the spirit, connecting you directly into the ground, into the foundation, the fundament that we are incarnate within, connecting those two, and everything that you put into it is limitless, because it's coming from your connection. And what you get out of it is limitless, because it's coming again from that connection. But it's not just unidirectional. You're not just channeling in and having abundance. You're putting in and getting back. And the ego is completely uninvolved. It's not parasitic. The ego is like, gotta have a hit, I'm hungry, because it's cut off from source. Egos don't have source. They have hits. They have feeding. They have, I got to get this, and I'm going to tell this one this thing, so I get that thing. Because the ego doesn't have this connection. The ego is running around in tight little circles trying to get stuff. Mm-hmm. When you connect up, you're connected up to the limitless source, and you're getting the limitless source, but it's different, because the other's connection to the limitless source comes through them, and yours comes through you, and your being is a lens which focuses your unique take on the limitless and gives that to the other. And you feed. It becomes, we've talked about this, in fact, it becomes that yin-yang symbol.
Well, okay, it's you say feed, but it's not feed. It's
Yeah, feed is wrong.
Feed is very wrong. Feed is from the third chakra. Third chakra feeds off of each other, or the two.
Flow.
The
Better word.
allowing the interaction to exchange in terms of, I guess you can call it flow.
If there's a better word than that, I don't know what it is, though.
All right. But my point is, what's happening is that the other person is being ignited. You're bringing the frequency up to the point where ignition happens. And the spirit breaks through. Okay, and it burns through the parameters or the boundaries that the ego has set up, because the ego can't handle this.
Exactly so.
It's got to be put to the side. So it's more of an ignition where the relationship exchange is brought so high that it flows like fire. And once that happens, there's a part inside a human being that allows for the spirit to ignite. Once that happens, you're in that point of eternity. Spirit resides in eternity. Bringing spirit into this moment allows for that higher perspective, as well as the ignition of what has been put inside of you. When you're born, your spirit has multiple gifts within. Multiple gifts within. But very few are encouraged to delve deeply in that, find what that is that ignites them, and follow a life path according to that. That's really what it is, the task of living down here, is to break through all of the layers that have been put on top of this seed and go right to the core of life itself. And ignite that seed, let it spark into life, and break the husks that are around it, so that it can penetrate through the density of this world, and rise up and grow, because it's a process. It's not an immediate, like flash, suddenly you're a firework. It's like, no. You rise, you grow, and then you come to fruition. All process. And that gift is inside of every single one of us, and every spirit. It resides there. And it's amazing when you're able to focus in and find that and ignite it. Because when you ignite it in yourself, other people, suddenly they feel the heat.
Yeah, this ignition, it also brings you into an eternal moment. You can ignite this gift or these gifts in relationship with the other, and you will find that what rises up is in terms of what we're talking about here, it becomes a gratitude. It becomes a gratitude for the other. It becomes a joy in the other. Because those two things are very closely related.
It's that joy. You're enveloped in the joy of living. And you're so grateful to be aware of it.
And the joy of the other who is with you in that relationship. The relationship is you mentioned ignition. It becomes a it becomes a space within which a resonant energy resides,
Right.
arises, ignites, binds, and becomes an eternal thing, because true relationships, non-transactional, non-survival relationships, and I don't mean that they aren't, they do survive, but what I'm trying to say is the relationships which aren't at the third chakra, they aren't at the first chakra, they're not at the second chakra, they're at that ignition point, because the heart is fire. If you're at the ignition point of a relationship, it becomes a resonant chamber of energy, and it becomes an eternal moment, which is why relationships like that survive the bounds of incarnation. You know that you have a relationship which survives your temporal existence with certain people that you have interacted with in this plane initially.
Right.
You build that relationship, and then one of you dies, because we all die. The soul of Everyman. Nobody gets off the planet alive. That's our motto. It's so true that we just try to ignore it as hard as we can. But at the end of the day, once you've forged or ignited a relationship, it's not that it doesn't matter. Of course it matters that one or another of you is no longer incarnate, but the relationship doesn't vanish. It just changes. And it only changes in the temporal. It doesn't change at all in the eternal. And that relationship is akin to, and why when you ignite in this, when 1 + 1 becomes infinite, you're back at source. The relationship of the infinite to you is also the same sort of relationship. Once you've done what Tolle has very, very succinctly said here, once you've gone deeply into the present moment, become completely conscious, you will find that the relationship that you may have temporarily forgotten in the ego state, an unconscious state, between your consciousness and that which is all the spirit of the universe, is the same sort of fire, crucible, energy, relationship. It's infinite, it's timeless, and you will realize that that's what you are. You are a piece, you are an emanation of source, and you are also source. You can find that here with another who is also an emanation, because it rises back up through the relationship to source. You can find it in yourself, in consciousness, because it rises back up. It all goes back up or out or to source. And once you've done any of those things, you have the gratitude of the present moment, the joy of the present moment, and the realization that that's all there is joy and gratitude and the present moment, and everything else is an ego shadow.
Well, that's all that matters.
Yes.
You know, in terms of you've released the material byplay of this world.
Yeah.
You observe things happening. It's kind of like observing the weather go by. Like, oh yeah, today's a sunny day. Oh, it's raining today.
Right, and some people get so caught up with the weather, and that's the problem.
Well, they're planning everything, which is fine if that's where you need to find some peace. But understanding that the peace of your heart is paramount. That should be the most important thing that you care for, is to maintain the peace of the heart. Most people believe that, well, as long as I've got my schedule all set up and all the appointments are, and I can meet all this, then I'm good. And you're sitting here going, but every time you tick off the next appointment, all you do is focus on, well, what's next, and what's next, and what's next. You never really set it up and then allow it to all unfold. Frankly, you could almost take a bet with yourself. It's like, okay, do you think that this is going to actually happen this way? Most of us would say, no, it never does.
Right. That's what you always hear, is the litany of, well, I plan and I plan and I plan and it still doesn't work.
Right. Well, it never does. So you sit there and you go, well, maybe we should consider doing it a little differently.
But maybe there's a message here? Is that maybe you're really not in control?
Well,
and you're like, no,
it can't be.
Can't be. Mm-hmm. That's the ego. It's a very good exercise, Margaret. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a very good exercise to take that voice in you that says it never works out the way I want it to, and then look at that voice in its figurative eye and say, yeah, so why are you in charge? Because it never works out the way you want it to. So why am I listening to you? And then think to yourself, who's the I in this conversation? Well, who's listening?
What I found, personally, is that question, when it's asked, the one that responds, well, it never works out that way, is actually that part of you that is truthful.
Yeah.
Okay? If the ego responds, the ego will say, well, we didn't do it the right way.
Right. Well, something else. There's something else to blame.
This is what I mean. To be able to discern between those two, you've got to understand the frequency of that response. Mm-hmm. It's truth. Mm. And that's from your soul, your spirit. It says, yeah, it never works out that way. And then the ego jumps in and says, well, we could try it this way, we could try it that way. Right. It's like, observe the internal conversation that's going on. It's like, well, that's my ego talking. Mm-hmm. But this is the consciousness that's looking at it going, that's futile.
Right. and by the way, this is going to strike a chord with people. What Margaret just said, observing the conversation that goes on, think to yourself that you can do that. You can hear your ego making all the excuses and blaming all the people and doing all the things. And you can hear your truthful voice, which is your heart voice, saying, well, this is the actual truth. And the key thing here to take away, you just hold your breath for a second and say, who's listening to these two people talking in my head? Because there's no one else really here. And then you'll understand that even your heart voice is still not the consciousness. The consciousness is that which listens, which is just a being. And what Tolle is exercise when he just gets you to look around at everything, it's getting you into that being state. The gratitude, when you have gratitude and joy, when you're truly in a moment of joy, you're not listening to your heart, you're not listening to your ego, you're just being and joyful.
Yes.
And that gratitude is the echo of that, almost like saying, And there's nothing else but just this gratitude for being alive, for the joy of being. The gratitude and joy aren't really different. They're two different words for that you can't find a word for it except being. But being is gratitude and joy. If you kind of try to separate a little bit, if you sine and the cosine of being is gratitude and joy.
So what's tan?
I don't know. We can't. Sometimes the analogies break down. Mm-hmm. It's gratitude over joy,
which creates one, which is an identity.
Gosh, you're right. Maybe that does work. Gratitude over joy equals one. Mm-hmm. We figured out math. Mm-hmm. Everyone's going like, what are they talking about? Be grateful you don't know.
To embrace the moment where you are conscious watching what is unfolding, without any voice and without any judgment. You're just there, observing and allowing the flow to come through you. Again, ground, align, and focus on a balance point. And then speak from the balance. Because when you speak from that balance, the communication is pure, it's true. And people will listen. What I've seen or observed is that they absorb what comes through, and then later on, pieces of what was said pop up in their consciousness, and they go, oh, is that what that means?
This is a very interesting observation. I just want to say what I heard back from you. That when you speak in that manner, when you speak from that center point, that heart point, it goes deep into another's consciousness. It evades the ego because the ego doesn't even listen to it. Almost tries actively to ignore it. But and the interesting thing is, if somebody's open and receptive, their ego has to step out of the way because, as Margaret said a little bit earlier, the ego can't take it. It literally can't handle the truth, as the echo of the movie. When you speak from the heart voice, the ego runs, the ego hides, the ego puts its figurative fingers in its ears. It gets out of the way. It gets into the consciousness and it sticks, you know. If somebody's really hurting or really seeking, really searching, when you find the receptive other, when you enter into a relationship, when the ignition happens, and these words are spoken in that resonant carrier, in that form, it doesn't have to last forever. The relationships can be moments of time. It doesn't matter because it's eternal. You pass a word, a phrase, an energy to the other, and it goes right past the ego fences and all the veils and sticks. And that thing it sticks into is what is a receptive. It's a receptacle that it fits into like a puzzle piece. You've done something. You've transmitted grace through you as a vehicle or a conduit into the other for a purpose. You're exactly where you were supposed to be at the exact right time.
Right.
You channeled in what they needed because it's all these things mesh like a million gears in the biggest machine you can even imagine.
Yeah.
And you were just bringing in your piece and passing it to the other and getting it past all the dross and all the ego nonsense. And it sticks and it fits and it kind of clicks into place and it becomes part of their experience. And it might solve an issue, but it's more than that. It has transformed them in a subtle and terrible and wonderful way. By accepting that piece of energy, puzzle piece into them, they've grown. You've done, and you get something. You too. I mean, you're not unchanged either in this exchange. But just talk about the other. You've given them something which was necessary, essential, and important, even if it was perhaps small, because size doesn't matter in this regard. It's just an essential piece because they're receptive, because they're ready, and you're there, and you just here's a word, and it's a word, an energy, a thought from source that couldn't
God.
get into them any other way, perhaps.
Usually, yeah.
And you're there, and you just reach out. Margaret does this. She reaches out a hand and touches this person, perhaps on their cheek, and just says, "This is what you needed to hear right now." And it goes in, it goes deep. And years later, and this isn't apocryphal, these people will meet again. Margaret will meet, and they'll say, "I've been thinking about what you said to me," and perhaps you don't even remember. But it's because it got in there into a place in their heart and soul that was needy and filled, and therefore grows, transforms. I said feed earlier, but the energy that is transmitted is not static, it's dynamic, and so it builds its own resonance. It fills a void.
Right.
And that void is something which then connects up to other parts of their consciousness and works them differently and takes them in a different direction. So these essential things, these eternal things, are also crux points. They're places where you move into a new, a new part of your cycle, a new energy path.
You are transformed in that moment into something greater than you thought you were.
You were.
And once you break that, you've broken through a barrier of some kind. And that's usually where the pain arises, by the way.
Yes.
The things are changing in your life, that the barrier is being pushed, and you could feel the pain. It's like, this is coming down. And then usually the first response is horror, because my world is falling apart.
That's an ego response, though.
But that is the response. So when you realize that this was too much for you, and you realize that there is an answer out there somewhere, and you start looking, what happens is God's hand comes and basically sets you on a path to open up that part of you that needed to hear. Because usually when you're protesting that your world is falling apart, it's usually because your world is too small for who you really are. So you get instruction from a higher source to take steps in a much broader direction. And it's a wonderful thing. It feels uncomfortable, but life is uncomfortable.
And I would say, Margaret, that energy piece is often given to you by a complete and total stranger in a momentary interaction, and you may never meet them again, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
And they may never even understand what it is they gave you. Or oftentimes they do, because they are connected. But sometimes it is just that. They're just there. I was told to give you this. Here it is. And if they're following the heart, whether they understand what they're giving you or not doesn't matter. That piece goes in, it evades the ego, goes right past it, goes deep in, snicks into a place within you, an important place that needed that energy piece, and it transforms you. And you probably have this experience. We all have this experience. We're just thinking back, saying, I met this person who gave me this answer, and it's always been with me ever since, and I've never met them again, but gosh, I can remember it as though it happened yesterday.
Right.
Those are important pieces. They are literally messengers. Think about angels. The word means messenger. They're literally, and every one of us is an angel at one point or another in our lives. We're bringing a message to someone. Sometimes in full consciousness. Sometimes just because we don't know why, we're impulsed to say a word, reach out a hand, do a deed, be in a certain place at a certain time. People call it fate or destiny. It has nothing to do with those things.
Or synchronicities.
Synchronicities, but it's not exactly. That's all ego stuff. The point is that you were connected up. You followed the heart path in an eternal moment, and you brought something from source, because you are connected all the time, whether you realize it or not, to another who's also connected, but needed you. The relationships are so important here. If it was all just about you, then there wouldn't need to be anybody else. It's not all about you. It is all about relationships, though.
Yes. And growing in a capacity to have a relationship that is sourced from love. Real love, not some mental construct of love. It has to do with understanding and respecting the spirit and soul that is in, and not worrying about the outside form. Because when one loves from that burning point, everything falls into place. It doesn't matter what people say to you, what you're wearing that day, what pronoun you're using, what color is your hair, what any event that's happening around you that's threatening you. Doesn't matter. Because you are at that burning point. And in fact, what happens is that all that threatening that's going on the outside gets burned away because you're residing right at that burning point. It burns, it literally shrinks down into almost nothing. And it's truly amazing because that's who we are.
And what it shrinks is all the dross of the ego. And the world is full of that. It's full of that, ego nonsense. And when you are in the ignition point, the burning point, when your relationship is what Margaret was just saying, that truly fire, that stuff shrinks, it shrivels, it evaporates.
Yeah. It's when in the Bible they say your life is a vapor. Well, when in the burning point, it just goes faster.
Lots faster.
Gone.
Gone.
So accepting your identity as a burning point is a major thing, because most of us don't believe that. And belief is something that you must look at internally for yourself, because each one of us has that burning point. I believe Joseph Campbell called it, follow your bliss. Well, it's not just, people think of bliss as like somehow you're sitting in a yogic position and yeah. It's like, no. Bliss is burning point.
Yeah. And it's also gratitude, and it's also joy.
Yes.
And one thing we have to be joyful and grateful for is that we've reached the end of the hour. We didn't even take a break.
Oh, well.
It's the last show of the year. Anyway, I'm Michael Lyons.
And I'm Margaret. And thank you for listening.